Hello and welcome. Dive into our content, subscribe, and activate notifications. The air felt crisp that spring evening, with a gentle breeze whispering through the garden trees. The sun had dipped below the horizon, yet the sky retained a warm orange hue. Garrett settled into his familiar wooden chair, stretching his legs as he poured a glass of 18-year-old Macallan whiskey over ice. The crack of ice breaking the silence, he savored the chill of the drink sliding down his throat. This was the couple's cherished ritual, just the two of them enveloped in tranquility. But that evening, Meredith seemed different. Her eyes weren't lost in the usual scenery. She nervously fiddled with the hem of her dress, avoiding his gaze. Garrett noticed but dismissed it, assuming she was merely fatigued. As the minutes ticked by, her unease grew palpable. Her posture suggested this wasn't just another ordinary night. He glanced at his drink, a sense of dread tightening his stomach. An unspoken fear gripped him, a feeling that their serene moment teetered on the edge of disruption. Finally, Meredith took a deep breath and spoke. "We need to talk." Her voice was calm, yet it carried an indefinable weight. "Go on," Garrett replied, masking his rising anxiety. She paused. It seemed she was either choosing her words carefully or summoning the courage to speak them. He waited, each second stretching interminably. Then Meredith met his gaze, her words direct. "I'm in love with someone else." Garrett remained motionless. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Her words reverberated through him like a thunderclap. For a second, time stood still. The soft rustling of leaves faded, the sky's glow dimmed, and the whiskey in his mouth turned insipid. His chest constricted as if the ground had vanished beneath him. "What?" His voice was barely recognizable. "I met someone," Meredith continued, her voice steady, devoid of hesitation or remorse. Garrett released a hollow laugh, hoping against hope she'd retract her words. But her eyes remained unwavering, resolute. "You're joking, right? Is this some sort of trick?" Meredith sighed and averted her gaze. "It's not a joke, Garrett. I've thought long and hard about this." For the first time, he understood this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a fleeting crisis, this wasn't an error. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, which was telling enough. "Does it matter?" Anger and disbelief surged within Garrett. Of course, it mattered. How could she even question that? "You're telling me you were unfaithful. How is that not significant?" It wasn't infidelity, she argued, her discomfort finally apparent. It was a feeling that grew, something I couldn't control. Garrett ran a hand over his face, struggling to comprehend. His marriage, once a bastion of certainty, was unraveling before his eyes, and he seemed to be the sole one caught off guard. Silence descended, oppressive. Meredith finally looked up at the dark sky and murmured, "I never intended for it to happen like this." Garrett chuckled, but it was devoid of humor. "You didn't want to? Then why did you?" Her response, colder than he expected, came after a pause. "Because I don't love you anymore." That was the final blow. A dull ache enveloped Garrett's chest, as if his heart were being squeezed relentlessly. He opened his mouth to argue, to insist she was mistaken, that it was all nonsensical. But deep down, he knew words were futile. Meredith had already made her decision. And he had no choice but to accept it. The next morning hit like a harsh reality. Garrett awoke to sunlight streaming into the bedroom, his eyes heavy and head spinning. Meredith's side of the bed lay untouched, the sheets unruffled, hinting at her absence. For a fleeting moment, Garrett hoped it was all a terrible dream. But as he surveyed the room, the harsh truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. Her closet stood ajar, barren. No dresses, no shoes, none of the small trinkets that used to fill their home. Only the faint scent of her perfume lingered, already dissipating. He rose, his heart burdened with a heavy weight, and made his way to the kitchen. The silence was overwhelming. The house felt emptier, colder, as if its very soul had vanished overnight. On the table sat a solitary pale envelope. Garrett paused before it, staring blankly for several moments before mustering the courage to open it with trembling hands. Inside, he found a stack of papers. The divorce documents were already prepared. No note. No added explanation. No apology. Just sterile, impersonal legal papers demanding his signature. His anger surged. The betrayal was agonizing enough, but Meredith's clinical detachment, treating it like a mere transaction, devoid of any acknowledgement of their shared years, cut him deeply. He clenched his fists, suppressing his rising fury. The shrill ring of his phone interrupted his thoughts. He glanced at the caller ID, an unfamiliar number. Reluctantly, he answered. "Hello? Mr. Reynolds?" The voice on the line was professional, composed. "I'm calling from Mrs. Meredith Reynolds' attorney's office. We want to remind you that the divorce papers were delivered to your residence. We'd like to schedule a time for you to sign them promptly." Her icy tone was the final blow. Meredith hadn't even allowed a full day before pushing to finalize the split. Garrett gritted his teeth. Too drained to argue, he simply responded, "I'll come by later today." He ended the call abruptly and tossed the phone onto the table. Taking a deep breath, he tried to quell the turmoil within. There was no alternative. He had to confront this final task and bring closure to it all. Hours later, he found himself at the law firm. The environment was stark, with white walls and dark wooden furniture. The scent of coffee and aged paper permeated the air. Meredith was already seated at the conference table, impeccably dressed, her hair perfectly styled. It seemed as if none of this had disturbed her composure. The sight of her so serene, so detached, churned his stomach. As if the years they spent together meant nothing at all. Across the table, the attorneys were poised. His own lawyer, Spencer, was already scrutinizing the documents. Garrett sat down silently. "Let's make this quick," Meredith's lawyer said, sliding the paperwork toward Garrett. "Just a few signatures and it will all be finalized." Garrett picked up the pen, but before he could sign, Spencer leaned in and whispered, "Wait." Garrett shot him a questioning look. "What?" Spencer quickly reviewed the documents, then pulled him aside, speaking in hushed tones, "These papers aren't right. Meredith's relinquishing most of the assets." Garrett froze. "What do you mean?" "Your mountain cabin is still yours." He frowned in confusion. "That old cabin?" Spencer gave a knowing smile. "When you called me this morning, I did a quick review of the contract and your assets. Didn't dive deep, but that cabin's worth a fortune now." Garrett blinked in disbelief. "But it's just an old cabin, yes," Spencer nodded. "But they approved a ski resort nearby, and the land's value has skyrocketed." "How do you know all this?" Spencer crossed his arms, clearly satisfied with himself. "My client is the one developing the resort there, so you lucked out and essentially became a millionaire," Spencer remarked, "and Meredith has no clue. That's why she parted with the cabin so easily." Garrett's heart beat rapidly as he glanced at Meredith, who was tapping her fingers impatiently on the armrest. She was oblivious to the oversight she had made. A torrent of emotion surged through him. A part of him wanted to confront her with the truth, to highlight how her cold, hurried decision had cost her something valuable. Yet another part of him relished the thought of simply letting it go. With a deep breath, Garrett gripped the pen and glanced at Spencer. "Let's sign anyway." The pen glided across the papers, finalizing his decision. Meredith watched, her face betraying no emotion. As soon as the last signature was in place, she collected her copies and exited without a word. Garrett lingered for a moment, gazing at the empty spot before him. For the first time, he experienced something unexpected: freedom. Leaving the law firm, he felt the weight of those signatures still pressing on his fingers. The late afternoon sun cast an orange glow across the sky, contrasting with the void inside him. He should have felt something: anger, relief, anything. Instead, there was only a peculiar numbness. The marriage was officially over. Meredith departed without a backward glance, and for the first time in years, he found himself utterly alone. Without a plan, he wandered the streets, absorbing the city's sights and sounds in a way he hadn't in ages. The hum of traffic, the laughter of strangers spilling from cafes, the wind rustling store awnings, everything seemed distant, as if he were an outsider observing his own life. Before long, he found himself outside a small corner bar. Its flickering neon sign cast a bluish glow, the Rusty Nail. He'd frequented this place years ago, before Meredith turned his evenings into upscale dinners and endless social events. Without hesitating, he stepped inside. The familiar scent of aged wood and whiskey enveloped him, offering an unexpected comfort. He took a seat at the bar and gestured to the bartender, a weary-looking man of middle age. "The usual," the bartender asked, recognizing him. Garrett hesitated. "The usual?" What did that mean now? "A double whiskey." "Neat." The glass appeared before him, and he took a slow sip, savoring the warmth as it burned down his throat. He closed his eyes, allowing the drink to fill the silence within. Then a voice spoke from beside him. "Welcome to the Broken Hearts Club." He turned to see a woman a few seats away, cradling a glass of red wine. Her blonde hair was loosely pinned up, and her eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to hold stories he'd never heard. Olivia Carter. He recognized her instantly as she had been the assistant attorney at Meredith's firm during the divorce proceedings. He knew little about her, other than her professional demeanor. Yet here, in this bar, she seemed different, more authentic. "You celebrating a divorce too?" he asked, managing a faint smile. "Celebrating isn't quite the word," she replied, "but yeah, it's been 2 years since I signed my papers." It was straightforward, no drama, no scandal, Olivia said, swirling her wine and watching the liquid dance. "At first, it felt like freedom. Then I realized I didn't know what to do with it." Garrett leaned in, intrigued. "And now? Have you figured it out?" She raised an eyebrow, taking a sip before responding. "Not yet, but I'm enjoying the journey." There was something captivating in the way she spoke. It wasn't just Olivia's candor that drew Garrett in, but her comfort with her own vulnerabilities. For the first time since Meredith had left, Garrett found his thoughts drifting away from his ex-wife. They talked for hours. The drinks loosened their tongues, and conversation flowed effortlessly. Olivia's straightforwardness appealed to Garrett. She spoke about life with raw honesty, unafraid to admit she sometimes had no idea where she was headed. At one point, she laughed at something he said, a genuine sound that made him smile for the first time in days. Time slipped away unnoticed as the bar emptied, leaving them engrossed in their dialogue. Then, unexpectedly, Olivia leaned toward him. Her eyes darted between Garrett's lips and her own thoughts. Realizing what was about to happen, he hesitated for a moment. Then she kissed him. It was slow and deliberate, a mix of familiarity and novelty. Garrett returned the kiss, but then pulled back slightly, looking at her with a mix of surprise and uncertainty. "I was married until a few hours ago," he admitted. Olivia smiled softly, unembarrassed. "And now you're not." Garrett took a deep breath, glancing at her half-empty glass. "Do you do this with all your newly divorced clients?" She laughed, shaking her head. "You're not a client anymore." They fell silent, studying each other as if trying to predict where this might lead. But for once, Garrett didn't worry about tomorrow. He simply lifted his glass in an impromptu toast. "So, here's to the unknown." Olivia raised her glass and gently clinked it against his. "To the unknown." And for the first time in a long while, Garrett felt that there might be life beyond the end. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the living room floor. Garrett slowly opened his eyes, feeling the remnants of last night's hangover. He ran a hand over his face, trying to clear his thoughts, and his gaze fell on the divorce papers scattered across the table. He picked up the documents, examining them more carefully this time. The agreement was fair. Meredith took her portion, and he retained his. No ugly disputes, no endless arguments. Just a definitive conclusion. Then his eyes landed on a detail he hadn't noticed before, the cabin. That old mountain cabin. Meredith had always despised that place. She detested the isolation, the utter silence, the lack of creature comforts. She had never hidden her disdain for it. That's why they hadn't visited in years. In the end, she relinquished the cabin without a second thought, as if discarding a worthless relic. Garrett stared at the document for a long while, a strange unease growing inside him. Then he grabbed his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and tapped the call button. The line rang twice before Spencer answered. "Spencer, I need to talk to you about the cabin." Garrett held the phone tightly as he listened to Spencer. His voice was calm, as always, but what he said made Garrett's heart race. "Garrett, remember what I told you on the day you signed the divorce? That old cabin might not seem like much, but the land." Garrett frowned, trying to piece it together. "What about the land?" There was a brief pause before the response that changed everything. "As I mentioned, they're building a ski resort next door. Luxury hotels have already purchased land for new developments. Your property is extensive and sits right in the heart of the project. It's definitely worth at least $10 million. Everything around Garrett seemed to come to a halt. He blinked a few times, trying to comprehend. "How much?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "At least $10 million, Spencer confirmed. Maybe more." A shiver coursed through Garrett as he stared at the divorce papers on the table, recalling how casually Meredith had discarded the cabin. She had deemed it worthless, something to be cast aside. In doing so, she had unknowingly forfeited a fortune. He tightened his grip on the phone, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Spencer, please tell me there's already interest." The ensuing months were a blur. News of the area's development spread rapidly, and soon major hotel chains began making offers. After some strategic negotiations, Garrett finalized a deal with an international resort conglomerate. Final selling price, $12 million. He vividly remembered the moment he signed the contract. The company's attorney extended a hand, smiling, and Garrett, still in disbelief, shook it, trying to grasp the reality of it all. Not only was he liberated from a failed marriage, but he was also a millionaire. And perhaps most importantly, he was no longer alone. Olivia was by his side. What began as a conversation in a bar, followed by an unexpected kiss, blossomed into something genuine. They started seeing each other regularly, and as the months passed, their bond grew stronger. When the official offer for the land came through, Garrett looked at Olivia and knew exactly how he wanted to use the money. He didn't desire mansions. He wasn't interested in complex investments. He didn't want to be tethered to anything. He wanted to live. So he made a spontaneous decision, a year-long journey around the world with Olivia. Paris, Rome, Tokyo, Sydney. Places he had always dreamed of but never had the time to visit. Destinations that were no longer distant fantasies, but the next chapters in a new story he was finally writing his way. As the plane took off for their first destination, Garrett gazed out the window and smiled. The past was behind him. The future awaited. And for the first time, he was exactly where he wanted to be. Sitting in a seaside restaurant, Garrett sipped wine and watched Olivia laugh at something the waiter said. They were in Greece, one of many destinations in their recent travels. Life had never seemed so unburdened. No pressures, no worries, no marriage binding him to something that had ceased to exist. That's when his phone buzzed. A message from a close friend appeared on the screen. "Dude, you won't believe it. Meredith broke up with that college kid. Apparently, he cheated on her with someone younger." Garrett chuckled quietly, shaking his head. The irony was almost too much. She had left a stable marriage for a fleeting fling, convinced she had found something better. In the end, she received a dose of her own medicine. Setting the phone aside, he focused back on Olivia, who was watching him curiously. "Bad news?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Garrett smiled softly. "Not really. Just life doing what it does best." He let the topic drop and concentrated on the moment. But a few weeks later, the past reappeared at his doorstep. They were briefly back home, visiting friends before their next adventure. Leaving a coffee shop, Garrett heard a familiar voice call his name. Turning, he found Meredith standing on the sidewalk. She wore sunglasses, but Garrett could see her face was tense, appearing more worn than he remembered. There was something different about her now, less arrogance, more uncertainty. "We need to talk." Her voice carried a blend of vulnerability and an attempt at control. Garrett crossed his arms. "About what?" She took a deep breath before continuing. "I know I made a mistake. I messed up with you, Garrett. I let something good slip away because I thought I knew what I wanted. But I didn't." He remained silent, simply listening. "I know I figured it out too late, but I can see your life has changed. You're different now." Garrett understood. She must have heard about his newfound wealth, but remained clueless about its source. Perhaps she assumed he had inherited a fortune or made a savvy investment. Meredith was still in the dark about the cabin. She hadn't realized she had carelessly discarded the only asset that could have exceeded all her financial dreams. Her voice wavered as she continued. "I was wondering if there's still a chance. If we can start over. I don't want what we had to end like this." Garrett studied her for a long moment, absorbing every nuance. There was a time when those words would have meant everything to him. But now, they held no significance. He took a step back, exhaling a peaceful sigh. "Meredith, I've moved on." Her eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised by his response. "Garrett." But he merely shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips. "Take care of yourself." And without a backward glance, he walked away. In the end, life really does have a way of working things out. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.